Blumhouse did not develop the model for low-budget horror filmmaking, but it's found a way to produce such films at such a prolific pace that it's become the king of the field. Lower budgets and the lack of need to stick to a larger franchise continuity allow for an assembly line production output that features many young filmmakers under one umbrella. This philosophy has led to a wide range of effectiveness. Modern genre classics such as Get Out, Insidious, Sinister, and Paranormal Activity help to define the company, with forgotten flops such as The Martyrs remake, The Gallows Act 2, and Amityville The Awakening are swept away by the tide of profitability. Their business model is a blunt acknowledgement of the incentive structure of the horror film market. These films are relatively so cheap to make it doesn't matter if over half the titles are crap, they'll still make major profit. That said, I appreciate Jason Blum's work for the genre. He has helped shepherd several of the most exciting horror filmmakers into the industry and steered several successful franchises that I'm a fan of. He helped my personal favorites, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, resurrect their careers. So with this being said, today's video will examine one of the newest films from the company, Night Swim. The film was Bryce McGuire's feature directorial debut. He had co-directed the short film with his friend Rod Blackhurst back in 2014. After watching the short, James Wan bought the rights to a feature film adaptation, and a decade later, the feature film was released. McGuire had worked as a screenwriter in the years following that short film's initial success on YouTube, and would now be moving into the director's chair. McGuire would serve as writer-director, with Jason Blum and James Wan producing the film, as a co-production between their companies Blumhouse and Atomic Monster. Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon would star in the film. It was released theatrically on January 5th, 2024. Off its reported budget of $15 million, it made over $54 million worldwide. The film was ravaged by critics who viewed it as yet another in a long line of mediocre January horror film releases. With this brief context laid out, let's review Night Swim. The film attempts to follow in the footsteps of the best of Blumhouse, in particular the work of James Wan, by centering a family drama in its horror with poltergeist and influence cited by McGuire. There is an effort made to try and establish this as a family to care about, as a relatable suburban family, but this effort ultimately fails before we even get into the meat of the horror. The reason this effort fails is multifaceted. It starts with the generic writing. This feels like a generic script for a short film to a feature film adaptation, with a lot of the plot holes that these films typically fall into being omnipresent throughout the narrative. The core concept may be interesting enough to carry a short film, but stretching out what should be one cool moment in a larger horror film into a feature film strains the concept past its breaking point. There isn't any weight to anything that is going on. The characters are underdeveloped, cliched, stupid, and unlikable, which isn't a good combination. We then get to the problem of the acting, which is bad. The delivery on the lines is sometimes laughable, especially when we get to the supposedly scary parts. I am not the type of audience member who laughs at horror films and constantly tries to find ways to feel superior to them, but this film is undeniably unintentionally funny, which is the only thing that maintains any level of my interest. So, with the emotional core of the film falling flat, we have little reason to care about what happens to this family. Even if the setup had been executed well, the second half, with the horror elements ramping up, would have killed the film anyway. The horror sequences are mostly bland, generic, and unscary. It feels like a by-the-numbers jump-scare fest, which is what gives jump scares their negative reputation. You can use jump scares effectively as the base for a great horror film. Look at the works of James Wan, but this film uses them as a band-aid for a lack of polished filmmaking. I understand this is a directorial debut, but McGuire holds on to the crutches of the genre too strongly, which undermines some of the cool camera work and concepts he sometimes flashes. His clear inspiration from the tub scene in Nightmare on Elm Street is a cool idea that we only get to see glimpses of. I wish he had worked to break free of just feeling like a generic Blumhouse horror film and leaned into what made his vision unique. Those glimpses of creativity are few and far between in this film, leaving you much more bored than intrigued. I wish I had more to say about the film, but ultimately, it falls flat. It is technically competent enough. It's not a horrible film by any means. It commits the cardinal sin of horror films of this style, however. It's boring. This is also yet another film in a long line of PG-13 horror films that feel completely neutered for a mass audience. I know that you can make a good PG-13 horror movie, just look at The Ring, but you need to be willing to push the envelope a little and be able to defend your choices. Be brave enough to make a viscerally scary movie without all the gory violence. It's possible and could bring in the much desired box office haul all these generic films are looking for. Yes, I appreciate Blumhouse and the contributions of Jason Blum to the genre, but for Night Swim, it's a miss. It's made decent money, which will help to pump out more and more of these films, with some of them potentially being great in redefining the genre for the next decade. We've seen it before. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.